Hi, I'm Heidi Hutner, and this is Coffee with Hx2. I'm here with Eban Goodstein from Bard College. He's the Director of Sustainability Studies there. They have an MBA program and an environmental program at large. I'm here with my class, and we're going to be talking with you about your work as an environmental economist. And I know you have a lot to say about the presidential election, but also about jobs in the environment, the economy. There's some great quotes I wanted to read. One is, "No generation before us has faced a decade of choices that will so profoundly impact the course of life on this planet as those we now face. And no generation before us has had the opportunity to enrich the future so vastly." So it's a very positive spin on the challenges we're facing.
Yeah, I actually wrote a book about 10 years ago called Fighting for Love in the Century of Extinction, How Passion and Politics Can Stop Global Warming. And I was kind of meditating on how challenging it is to sort of just engage with this issue because, I mean, I talk about global warming and mass extinction all the time, and our students like you are studying this stuff, and it just can be overwhelming. I think a lot of people turn off because they just can't really, they just don't want to deal with it. I mean, they'd rather, you know, your friends would rather kind of stick their heads in the sand and drink beer, and I know you can't do both of those at the same time, but, you know, most people just don't want to pay attention.
Right.
And I actually was thinking about, well, is it an apocalypse? I mean, is that what we're headed towards? And I don't really think so. I mean, you know, a hotter planet is just going to be one of the challenges that young people are going to have to face. It's going to be a whole century full of amazing new technologies and innovations and wars and diseases and all of the things that have marked human history for 5,000 years are going to continue. And a hotter planet's going to be a thing that's going to be a challenge that we have to address. But what I think is that rather than think of it as like forestalling apocalypse, I like to think of it much better as we have this chance to just make the future a much better place.
Right.
And in particular around the other creatures on the world, because I was writing the book at the time when we were looking at, you know, maybe climate change would initiate 60, 70, 80% reduction in species biodiversity. And for my mind, the most important reason to keep this incredible planet that we have inherited, you know, intact in the way we think about it is to say, it would just be so sad for people not to have that. I mean, they might even know, they wouldn't miss it, right? Because they wouldn't know what they were missing in many ways. You know, when I used to live out in Oregon, they used to say that the Columbia River was so full of salmon that you could walk across the backs of those fish from one side to the other. And that's cool, and wouldn't it be cool if that was true today? I mean, wouldn't it just be like so mind-blowingly amazing? But most people don't really care because they don't even imagine. They have no idea what it was. And so to me, that opportunity to sort of preserve that biodiversity and all that amazing scientific knowledge and beauty is just such an incredible opportunity for us.
I think we do know, though. I'm going to argue with you a little bit. I mean, I'm writing a book called Eco-Grief. And what I'm talking about is that even if we're not acknowledging it, because most of us do have our heads buried in the sand, me included. I mean, you can't walk around thinking about this 24/7. It's too much. But I think everyone's feeling it. I think it's permeating us. So we've gotten used to it. We kind of live with it. But, you know, I still cry when I see the polar bear, you know, on that little ice cap. Or, you know, the idea of lions being extinct. You know, and I don't live with lions directly, but I think we are feeling it.
Yeah.
What about you all? Are you feeling it? You are feeling it every day, every day. I mean, just think about bees. Where are the bees? Where are the monarch butterflies? They were in my yard just a few years ago. I'm not seeing them.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it's sad because it's such a beautiful moment. When you see the monarch butterfly, you know, it's just like your heart jumps, right? It leaps. And the thought that it's like something's missing in my garden.
Yeah. No, I agree with you completely. And I think that those of us who are experiencing it and who find that incredible sort of spiritual engagement with the world around us, it's heartrending, and it makes it so hard to stay engaged because it's, you know, every day you read an article in the newspaper about some battle we're losing.
Some next battle.
Yeah, and so that's why we need to win those battles, is to sort of have that incredibly rich palette for people to experience in the future.
Right, and you were talking about finding your passion.
Yeah.
Finding the thing you love to do,
Yep.
which is, of course, gives you the motivation to keep being active and engaged and trying to help.
Yeah.
So in terms of economics and policy, which is your specialty, why don't we ask the students, do you all have some questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Sure.
What advice do you have for undergraduate students who are interested in eventually applying or pursuing like an institution, like Bard College graduate programs?
Graduate programs? Well, do it. You know, our graduate programs, what we're looking for is smart people who want to change the world. You know, you don't have to have 4.0 to come to Bard. Well, we won't turn you away. You know, we'll accept you. But, you know, we just want folks who, you know, because, I mean, kind of the good news here, I'll talk more about this later today, is that, you know, you don't need a graduate degree to get out there in kind of the Save the Planet business. But if you want to pursue a leadership career in the space, pretty much you're going to need to do it. And, you know, do I do it now? Do I do it later? But in our particular program, you know, that's pretty much what we're looking for. And, you know, you can, so we're looking for somebody who not only, you know, can kind of master the kind of academic dimensions of graduate school, whether it's business or policy or education, but also has demonstrated a commitment to putting those skills to the kind of use that we're all about.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah.
So before you mentioned in terms of environmental sustainabilities and getting jobs in sustainable, in the environment, you mentioned 3 tiers. You said policy, communications, and like society, and you mentioned business.
Yes.
So considering things like social media, which do you think makes the biggest impact in the shortest amount of time? Like which tier of that? Which of the 3 tiers?
All 3 are needed because you got to have action on all 3 levels. And actually, it's a good question because I think that the difference between the students who pursue those different spaces is kind of their level of patience.
That's interesting.
Because education, if you go into education, you can't expect quick results, right? You know, whether, you know, it takes a long time to change minds and to engage people in that conversation. Policy, that requires a little less patience because you're talking on the time scale of years or maybe a decade to sort of see change. But there you have to have the patience to kind of work within organizations and governmental structures and corporate bureaucracies and other groups to sort of drive the kind of rule change that, because policy doesn't just happen in government, although it does, like the UN and national governments and local governments. It also happens increasingly within businesses. So there's somebody at Stony Brook who's the sustainability director, right? And their job is to change policy. Is that you?
It's
is that your
me.
title as
That's
well?
my title.
Okay, so you're a policy director, policy
I'm
person
right
as well.
here. Yeah.
So, you know, part of your job is to get people eating more local and organic and reducing the carbon footprint and all that stuff, right? So that requires, you know, but then the most impatient are the folks who are going to go into business because that's really about sort of how do I immediately build solutions and transform organizations? How can I work directly on the issues? So I don't know if that's more about like the personal thing. Which one has the biggest impact? It doesn't matter. We need all 3.
And they work together. They all work together.
Yeah.
So I'm not the grounds sustainability person. I'm the educational director.
All right, yeah.
So just to be clear.
Yeah.
And so I'm sort of limited because I don't have those decisions.
Yes.
But I'm part of them and I influence them and I hope to, you know. But I want to jump in. I'm sorry I keep arguing with you. But so as an educator, I have to say it is one of the most exciting things to see the light bulb go off. And it feels more
Absolutely.
instantaneous to me.
Yeah.
I mean, some pieces of it are very, very slow, but some of them are incredibly quick. So there are people sitting in this audience who I know are out there doing amazing things. And I watch them walk in the door to our program. And I watch them evolve and sort of begin to, so it feels a little faster in some ways than other.
How long have you been in the business?
Well, that's a very good point.
Takes a while.
Yeah,
I mean, right now,
that's true.
I'm an educator, right?
Yeah.
And I run a sustainable business program, and so I'm, you know, incubating entrepreneurs who
Right.
are doing amazing things,
Right.
and it's so cool. And so I can probably see very tangible and kind of high speed impacts because I happen to be in that particular
I see.
space,
Yes,
right?
yeah. Yeah.
But if it's
By the time
it's
you
a long
start,
slog.
right, this is
yeah.
true. This is
I've been
true.
at it 30 years.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. No, that's a good, very excellent point. Excellent question.
Yeah.
Before you mentioned that a little economics is useful and a lot can be seen as useless.
Yeah.
Do you mind elaborating on that?
Yes. Or do I mind? I don't mind. I'll elaborate on that. I have a PhD in economics, and think that kind of the foundational sort of principles of economics are extremely useful to understand how market systems work, how the macroeconomy operates. But the profession of economics, like I think many academic professions, has at the higher levels has kind of wandered off into irrelevant theory land. As a consequence, much of what is done kind of in terms of research by PhD economists is just useless. I mean, like people write articles that 4 other people read, and it just doesn't doesn't impact the world really in any way, shape, or form. So that's what I meant by that. I mean, and sometimes it's actually counterproductive because it's these theoretical constructs that sort of are ideological in nature, either on the right, excessively sort of free trade, or on the left, excessively, command and control arguments. And it, does that help?
It does. Yeah, it seems like what you're saying is the more we get bogged down in the specificities of economics, the more progress is slowed, and we can't really have a full discussion on how we can use that stuff.
Yeah, and I think most of it is not really usable because these are sort of activities that are incentivized by an academy that rewards people publishing in journals, as opposed to an academy that rewards people for, actually developing solutions that are to all the real pressing challenges that we face.
And that's an academic problem at large.
I think so too. Yeah.
Been in this field and been an educator for over 30 years. How are you viewing almost like the international relationship to save the planet? Because we've talked about like the national and how we as students in the United States can go into this field and change the world, but how are you seeing the international connections and the gaps that are being bridged? Because for people who are living here, say in Long Island, we don't really see the impact of not having water, not having food, and feeling like global warming, but whereas in other countries, this is like a very, very like prevalent problem that's like an everyday issue.
I mean, you could just look at the difference between Haiti and North Carolina, right? I mean, tragically, we lost 20 lives, I think, as a consequence of the hurricane. They lost 800, and their economy is just decimated as a consequence. So your question, I mean,
the international relationship, because I don't really understand, like, how are people actually working together around the world?
Okay, well, we were talking earlier about the international process around climate change that was actually kicked off by Republican President George H.W. Bush back in 1992 when he negotiated and signed the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. For the last 25 years, every year, all the nations come together and they discuss, progress towards stabilizing the climate at a safe level. That's the official requirement of the treaty. And of course, nothing's really happened for 25 years. Until last year, we finally kind of got beyond sort of an unfortunate dialogue in which the sort of perspective was that this is a first world problem and the developing countries aren't on board, and then the United States will say, well, if the developing countries aren't on board, we're not going to go, and sort of this back and forth. Finally, everybody said, okay, we're all going to come to the table. We're all going to make commitments that are differentiated based on our capabilities. And so the U.S. agreed to cut emissions 25% by 2025, below 2006 levels. Chinese agreed to cap their coal production by 2020, and it looks like they've already done it, and to start reducing emissions in 2030. Indians did not agree to a cap on their emissions, but they said we're going to be 40% renewables by 2050. And that's 40% renewables for 1.5 billion people, right? So that's just huge. And it's the kind of commitment that is already driving these industries. And in some sense, you kind of can really despair about this issue, but because we could have 90% cuts in global warming pollution by 2060, by 2100. And you think, God, how's that possible? But, if you think about 100 years ago, what was the major pollution source from transportation here in Stony Brook? major pollution source from transportation right on the eve of World War I. Yeah, it's horse poop. Absolutely. Horse poop. That was the major pollution source from transportation. We've definitely managed to reduce emissions of horse poop by well over 90% over the last 100 years. We did that, right? It's a great achievement. And so we actually know already what we need to do to solve this problem. It's not a mystery. We went from horses to internal combustion cars. Now we've got to go somewhere else. That somewhere else, there's a guy named Elon Musk who's got a company named Tesla, and he's making electric vehicles, and so is GM. And if you power those electric vehicles on renewable energy, solar and wind, you've solved 80% of the problem, right? And so it's just a question of how fast we can drive that. And what these international agreements are doing is creating a global framework to support the rapid spread of those technologies. And the question is the political will strong enough? Will it stay? I mean, Germany's gone from 5% renewable, 6% renewables in 2000 to over 30% in 2015. On a good day, they'll get 90% of their power from wind and solar.
Extraordinary.
Yeah, so it's amazing how fast this could happen if we just, collectively figure out how to do it.
And agree to.
Yeah, agree to it and drive it.
So we just have a few minutes left. Questions? It's an incredible opportunity.
Yeah.
In terms of art, I consider myself a conceptual artist. I wanted to know, you mentioned art in the education aspect before.
Yeah.
So I wanted to know, what jobs can come from, your MBA program and in general, and do you feel like it makes a big enough impact as it can in, what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so this question of art and communication, I was once on a panel right after I wrote my book about fighting for love with some English professors. And we were talking about solutions to climate change. They said, "Oh, you economists, you know how to do this. I wish I was an economist because I've got the cap and trade thing and the carbon tax, and you know what to do." And I'm saying, well, I just spent a year and a half of my life trying to be as poetic and evocative and metaphorical as I possibly could to get people actually engaged in this thing.
Right.
And so, visual artists, spoken word artists, musicians. Bob Dylan just won the Nobel Prize. Did you see that for literature? Yeah. We got to have everybody pulling for this. In terms of getting paid to do it, I don't know exactly the space you could go into.
Design is one.
I mean, design is, yeah.
So Pratt
Yeah.
has an incredible art program focused on sustainability,
Ability.
green design.
Yep.
We actually have a course in the spring, so you should take it, where it's all focused on graphics, film. They're going to learn all kinds of skills,
Yeah.
practical skills that you'll then apply to a green project. So.
Yeah. So I think that's probably. But then there's design. But then there is also communication. So
Right.
Depends upon which direction you wanted to take it.
Yeah. Every business has advertising and packaging, and every box you open, a friend of mine's a really phenomenal designer.
Yeah.
He said, people take for granted every single thing we use, somebody designed it.
Yep.
And there's everything, a doorknob,
Yep.
a light bulb.
Yep.
So, and we don't pay attention unless that's our focus. I'm sure it's yours though. So it's really, again, I would agree with you, and finding your passion with that and how you want to apply it.
Yep.
So we have 2 minutes, one more question.
Just on personal note for people that are watching and my younger kids that want to get into it, can you describe yourself in high school or undergrad and, kind of paint the picture of who you were?
Wow. I'll tell you the first time I ever heard about global warming. And this is kind of amazing. Global warming is like something I didn't know, but nobody knew about it when I was a kid. Literally. And so the first time I ever heard about it was 1981, probably. And I was a junior in college, and we had a little environmental group that was anti-nuclear. So we were an anti-nuclear group. We were meeting, and there was this guy named Al L. And Al was this sort of 30-year-old guy with long blonde hair and a guitar, and for some reason he was still hanging around campus, and he showed up, and he was ashen-faced, literally. I remember, he said, the studies have come out, and the U.S. government scientists have proved it. There's this thing called the greenhouse effect, and we're all doomed. And we were like, oh, Al, whatever. That's just Al. Don't pay any attention to him. And of course, he was right, and 7 years later, it was very real. I grew up in the mountains in South Central Tennessee, and I had this amazing place where I had 8,000 acres that I could roam around and go caving and hiking and camping, and all that stuff kind of led me to study geology in college and eventually become an environmental economist, because I was interested in, how are we going to, meet all these sustainability challenges that we have. And I didn't want to be a scientist. I wanted to be someone who was more actively engaged in talking about the world. But the other piece that was important for me is that my parents were very active in the civil rights movement in the 60s in the South. And so that was sort of always part of my milieu. And I became very interested in how do you actually get lots of people engaged? How do you sort of build a movement? And so that was always part of my growing up. And it's been a lot of the work I've done is how do I bring those kind of childhood lessons about movement building into this world, and how do we figure out how do we get tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of people thinking about this stuff? How do we scale whatever solution we're working on?
So we do have to stop, and I thank you so much. And
Pleasure.
Interestingly, this class is studying utopias and dystopias. I think I mentioned that. So you all, I want you really to think about what is the utopia that you want to be building in a bigger sense, right? What are the things that you feel, if you really could have the world you want to live in, what would it be? That's your final project. So I think you've given us a lot of food for thought.
I would just close on that and thinking about what you said. I was very influenced by sort of the utopian vibe of the civil rights movement.
Right.
And it kind of keeps me going. So, we shall overcome, and, we'll build a new Jerusalem, and we'll raise the prisons to the ground. That was the kind of language that I grew up with. And so
Me too.
I'm very much, now I'm trying to think about how you build that world, in a much, in a Donald Trump environment.
Right.
It's not as simple a world as it was back in the 60s. So how do you kind of take that sense that there is, that possibility exists, but then bring it into a world that's messy and complicated?
Mm-hmm. I think some of the climate march in the city,
Yeah.
right? The People's Climate March has that spirit.
Yeah.
Some of we didn't get into activism, but I think that some of the activist practices.
Did you do the
have
march?
that. I did.
Did you see us up on 6th Avenue? We had our classroom, our MBA classroom was right above 6th Avenue. We had big banners, and we were doing cheering out the window. Do you remember?
I don't remember that,
Yeah.
but we had like over 50 of us were
Yeah.
there. So
Yeah.
I sort of remember. Show me a picture.
Yeah.
We were there. Did you see us? We were the bunch of us. Some of you were there.
I'm sure we did, because we
Yeah.
saw all 400,000 people.
Well, then you saw us.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was
They
pretty
walked right
amazing.
below us.
Pretty amazing. And
Yeah.
we have I have a friend who actually, his name is Izzy, and he is from that time period, and he walked across California to here to join that.
Oh, good.
So
Cool.
speaking of that spirit.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up. And I thank everyone for being here, and I thank you so much for coming on
Pleasure.
and talking
Yeah.
to us today.
Yep.
Thank
Okay.
you.